you. Hello, I'm Marcie Milner with Shell Energy North America, and I have the honor of introducing this next panel. I just wanted to take a moment to tell you a little bit about Shell Energy. For those of you who don't know us, we are an energy service provider in California. We are also a natural gas, power, and environmental products marketer. In fact, we recently signed a long-term contract with an in-state wind developer to develop a wind project in California in order to better meet our customers' renewable energy needs. We also provide carbon neutral and renewable energy to many of the CCAs in California. And we're happy to see that California decision makers are taking a serious look at retail choice this year. We believe competitive markets inspire innovation to achieve carbon reduction goals while creating customer value, and we're looking forward to hearing the discussion from our panel. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce them. First, Michael Picker was named president of the California Public Utilities Commission in 2014. Prior to his appointment, President Picker was senior advisor for renewable energy in the office of the governor from 2009 to 2014. He was a principal at Lincoln Crow Strategic Communications, deputy treasurer in the office of the California State Treasurer, chief of staff to Sacramento Mayor Joe Cerna Jr., and deputy assistant for toxic substance control in the office of the governor from 81 to 82. He holds an MBA from UC Davis, specializing in marketing, social marketing, and nonprofit management. Please help me welcome Mr. Picker, President Picker. Our next panelist is Geof Syphers. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Sonoma Clean Power, a position he has held since the program's inception in 2013. Under his leadership, SCP now serves 450,000 people throughout Sonoma County with cleaner power at competitive rates. Prior to his current position, Mr. Syphers worked for 20 years as an energy consultant to utilities, public agencies, and private companies. His work has spanned microgrid design, zero carbon community design, and energy efficiency program implementation. He served as the Chief Sustainability Officer for Cotting Enterprises and was the founding director of DNV's Green Building Group. Welcome, Geof Syphers. And finally, last but not least, our moderator is Geof Byron. Geof has 40 years of experience in emerging energy technologies, customer requirements, and energy policy. He is a member of the Band of Angels, was a fellow in the inaugural cohort at the Stanford Distinguished Career Institute, and served as California Energy Commissioner from 2005 to 2011. Welcome, Geof Byron. Thanks very much.
Thanks. All right, gentlemen, welcome. Just a few introductory remarks, and then we'll get into it. Geof, I think it's just incredible with the job that you've been doing at the CCA in Sonoma. You know, this is just wonderful. In one fell swoop, you've addressed issues at the state level that we've tried to do over the last 20 years. And I can't tell you as a former commissioner, that excites me. President Picker, I've known you for a long time, but I want to tell you all a few things about President Picker that you might not know.
I'm waiting to hear. I probably don't know either.
So I met President Picker in Sacramento when I was a commissioner, and he had been hired by the governor to about 8 years ago.
October 2009.
But who's counting? He was hired to really, in my words, not his, expedite all the enormous number of renewable siting issues that were before us. It really was an unprecedented amount. And after I met with him, I thought, oh, now I understand. He's here to crack the whip, to get us to get this stuff done. And I have to tell you, he did. And it wasn't nearly as painful as I thought it was going to be. He did an extraordinary job, and we're glad to have his skills. But here's what I want to tell you. It was Governor Schwarzenegger that had hired him. And in fact, when Governor Brown came in, I think you may be one of very few people that the next administration kept. And I think that's just extraordinary to have done what he did with one governor, then another. But as if he didn't have enough to do while he was in the governor's office, he ran for the board of the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, where he served for 2 years?
1 year.
1 year. I wanted my support check back, as I recall. I think it's just an extraordinary accomplishment that these experiences have combined with the governor's trust. He was then appointed to the Public Utilities Commission, as you all know, where he's been, that was 3 years ago, and he's been president the past 2 years. So I've gotten to know a lot of PUC commissioner presidents over the, I think 4 of them now, and I don't think we could have a better informed or public advocate than President Picker. So thank you very much. So let's get to it. Yes, thank you. I hope I didn't reveal anything you didn't, okay. I think it's just a tremendous thing to be appointed by 2 governors to the role that you're in. So gentlemen, we have a lot of questions. Let me get started. I think there's a lot of folks here, like me, that just sat in awe back in February when the en banc hearing had the attention of all 5 commissioners all day long, overflow crowd, record number of people online. Clearly, there is a lot of interest in community choice energy. So my question to both of you is, why are we seeing so many cities and counties exploring and implementing these? What's your view of community choice energy? And I hope you don't mind, I know the official name is community choice aggregation, but it always sounds like aggravation to me, and so I prefer CCE. Either one of you, who would like to go? Why is this happening?
I see the CCAs as just one piece of a much larger continuum. And I think it started in 1998 when under SB 1890 we started to deregulate the vertically integrated utility industry. At that time, the legislature decreed that there was going to be retail choice of who you got your electricity from. But they also told the utilities, start divesting yourself of your generation. So at this point, we don't allow the utilities to own energy generation. They don't make much money on it. They get paid to go out and get contracts and to resell it.
Right.
We also began to allow other ways in which people could own their energy, even after putting all this back on the backs of those 3 dominant utilities after the market failure of 2000-2001. We allowed people to own their own solar on their rooftop. We have increased the amounts that people can actually get through expanding energy metering. We have begun to look at other kinds of programs that allow commercial and residential customers to try and transform markets for new technologies, whether it's fuel cells to battery storage through the self-generator incentive program. A whole slew of incremental decisions that have been taken in the legislature and the CEC through the energy efficiency standards, at the Energy Commission, the direct access programs that the legislature decreed. And what's happening is, I think, a counterpoint to the decision people made to actually deregulate choice of electricity service in 2000. We're seeing the whole industry being deregulated by innovation in policy, innovation in technology. So we're sort of at the point where we have to actually admit to ourselves that customers soon may actually want more of that choice, and we may have to just give it to them. Why make the dominant electricity utilities be the nominal provider of electricity if people want their choice? Now, how far does this go? Where does it end? And what impact does it have on community choice aggregators who still own every customer in a geographic area? Are there forces out there that would hollow you out every bit as much as these regulated entities? Got me. But that's what we started the discussion around at the CCA en banc. We're going to continue that May 19th in Sacramento, where we start to look at the next set of challenges that we face. The only thing I can tell you is that there is a set of forces that have begun moving in California that I certainly don't control, you certainly don't control, the dominant utilities don't control, and nobody has a plan.
Well, I think we do.
Well, good luck.
I think the
First of all, that was excellent. Thank you. Go ahead, Geof.
I am appropriately skeptical because I don't see it.
good. That's fair. So I think community choice is so popular because it's responsive to local needs in a way that is indisputable. I mean, the chief value above even the ability to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or provide rate savings when we can or anything else is that we're responsive. So, and that access to the energy economy, energy is an economy. In our small county of Sonoma of 500,000 people, there's over $600 million a year of cost that people pay just for electricity, if you include T&D and everything. And that economy is essentially inaccessible and opaque until you have some ability to talk about it in plain English with ordinary people and meeting in your community and making decisions about what do we want to invest in, what do we care about. In our industry, we care a lot about low-income housing, we care a lot about ag industry, we care a lot about wine and dairies. That's particular to our region, and our climate is mild enough that AC isn't very interesting. We don't do much with air conditioning. It's very different in Lancaster. And so they've emphasized electric buses, for example, as a business development tool. And I think that ability to craft a response to what's needed in the community and execute very rapidly. We can set rates on essentially 30 to 60-day notice. We can alter our rates. We can change a program and, in fact, cancel it if it's not working, essentially on a dime. And that kind of flexibility allows us to try a lot of things, figure out what works, and then invest there. And I think that model is something that's been missing from the large IOU system. And it's just a breath of fresh air to be able to do something with 6 months of research. We figure out how to run a program that discounts electric cars. We get it up and running. We try it out for 10 weeks. Great pilot, big success. We're going to do that again. And we were able to essentially complete that whole activity, do the analysis, and figure out what we're doing next in about a year. And that kind of innovation is going to be useful going out to the rest of California and communicating and accelerating the success. So I think the plan is not a coherent written document, but it's a cohesive conversation at the local level, and CalCCA, the trade association, is now convening all of those actors together to have that conversation about how do we do planning? How do we harmonize that? How do we have integrated plans that have diverse portfolios and recognize the fact that solar is an issue that we need to help support and correct, in a sense that we have so much solar now. I don't know, I didn't check today, but prices have gone negative fairly frequently this spring in the middle of the day. And so
I can look on my ISO app and tell you.
Thank you. And I think that kind of problem is so difficult to solve that I think we need to try 20, 30, 50 different things and probably start investing in the 4 or 5 that are really successful. And that's an area where CCAs, I think, can be a huge asset.
So President Picker, we don't have a plan, but when I showed up at the Energy Commission, we didn't anticipate 3,500 megawatts of renewables coming online in a short period of time. We weren't ready for it. Government has to play catch up sometimes to meet public demand. So let's get a plan.
Well, then let's talk about what the goal of the plan is, because I don't think that the plan is decentralized, centralized. That's not really the issue for me. The issue for me is that the legislature told us that we have a carbon goal of 40% below 1990 levels by 2030.
Right.
That is what I am making my agency into. We're the
wonderful.
agency that will build the infrastructure that grinds carbon out of the California economy. So
That's wonderful.
I may be skeptical about what the tools are that we use, but I will tell you that the modeling tells me that renewables are an important tool, but they are not in themselves the goal. If we don't start to admit that it's going to take more than renewables to get California levels of carbon emissions down to that goal that the legislature has set for us in SB 350, then we will miss. And the side fights over who's best prepared to do it, I think will probably come out in the grinding challenge of public policy and implementation. So I just take it for that. But let me tell you that only 20% of the carbon in California's economy comes from the electric industry. 30% comes from use of gas. Who here is talking about displacing the use of gas in people's homes? 3, it's transportation. I'm sorry, you're talking about buying renewables and contracts. I don't see you actually moving into the housing market. That is a local government standards and codes thing. If you activate your elected officials around that, God bless you. But I don't see it happening because I don't see it happening. So what I see is people building new housing right next to Aliso Canyon with gas hookups, for crying out loud.
Yeah. All right, that's great.
So
We're on the same page there.
And then 40% of the carbon comes from transportation.
Yeah.
So again, this is a local government challenge. I want to just say that focusing on renewables alone does not get us to that 2030 goal. We need that clean electricity, absolutely. But we won that fight. I flew from LA to Boise to go to a conference, and between Las Vegas and Boise, I saw 5 solar arrays and 2 large wind farms just out of the side of the plane that I was sitting on.
Yeah.
It's hollowing out baseload throughout the West. How do we use it to get carbon out of the California economy? That's the question. Don't come to me and tell me how much renewables you're buying. Tell me how you're using it to get carbon out of those other 2 sectors. I sat here in LA and listened to a dominant electric utility arguing with the gas company as to who is better prepared to get carbon and air quality pollution out of the ports, for crying out loud. Where are you guys in that fight?
All right.
You want to win me? You want to convince me? That's what the plan has to do.
Let's do it. Right? Yeah.
Wow. Wait, President Picker, this is great. I've never seen you as passionate. But Geof, you want to,
It was
Mr. Syphers,
that last cup of coffee.
it's good.
100%. And so
I know you and I see the same things.
So, but here's what's happening. So we've got community choice, public agencies that are talking about cross-agency coordination. So in Sonoma County, for example, we've got the water agency, the open space district, the county. We've got I'm missing something here. We're talking as a team about how do we use clean electricity to decarbonize our region, right? We reframed it. And that's happening around the state, actually. Those conversations are early days because CCAs are early. But one of the exciting things for me is being able to reframe it and say, because you're spot on. If there are people in this room who think the goal is % renewable, I want to change your mind too. So we're on the same page there. Because % renewable doesn't acknowledge hydro. It doesn't acknowledge that the real goal isn't more renewable, it's less fossil. So additionality is bullshit. Additionality doesn't matter at all. It's subtractionality. Let's just get that out there. How do we get less fossil? Because if we keep our eye on the ultimate goal, not the proximate one, then we actually get results. So the ultimate goals are things like investing in our local economy. Sure, that's an ultimate goal. That's jobs. It's decarbonizing everything. It's having affordable prices. Those are ultimate goals. The tools are things like renewables and electric cars and demand response and all of that. And so that focus on the real goals is something that we're really heavily focused on. And Cal CCA is really working on that as well, while still working on renewables.
So this is great, gentlemen. I just want to keep us moving on some other subjects, but you can stop me if you really want to stay on this for a while. President Picker, you've got a difficult job. You got to protect consumers from taking advantage of being taken advantage of by monopolies, but you got to also make sure they continue to provide the same level of excellent service that they have in the past. We did have a president of our PUC a while back that let one of those utilities go bankrupt. We can't have that. We've got to make sure that they continue to do well. But this regulatory compact, is it threatened by community choice energy?
No, I think that it's just another piece of the puzzle. I think that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, everybody thought the death spiral was being caused by rooftop solar and NEM. Now it's CCAs. I think that the issue is just that we have a very, very, very dynamic and innovative energy system, particularly on the electrical side, and it's changing everything for everybody. And so I think that's really the challenge. In my mind, the real issues are, how do we actually use these different vehicles that we have, and I'll just take a second to describe what I understand the electric utilities to be. They are a way that we set out a geographic area and awarded a franchise. Within that franchise, people were supposed to provide a resource, electricity in this case. We used to do it with rail lines before they deregulated that. And they were supposed to provide it to everybody on an equal basis. And they were supposed to build a lot of long-lived infrastructure real fast. And so that meant they had to be able to go out to capital markets to borrow a lot of money so they could build that infrastructure real fast and give everybody the service. In return for which, we didn't allow anybody else to compete with them in their service area.
Right.
And they could recover the money from a guaranteed cash stream of ratepayers that then would go back to pay off their borrowing or their investment. And so that's a model that worked pretty well for 100 years, particularly because it was very long-lived, centralized infrastructure. That's no longer true. The natural monopoly, and probably the most valuable piece of utility infrastructure in the state of California, is the wooden pole. Now, let me just say that a lot of people think we ought to hide the wooden poles. I personally would like to get my wife to help me knit a sock for the pole that's behind my house in the alleyway. That brings me more value than anything else. You know, SMUD does a great job of providing us clean electricity, but that's a commodity. That pole brings me telephony, electricity, backhaul fiber for the smart meters that SMUD helps me to use to take advantage of the time of rate structure that they've set in place. It has cable, the old aluminum cable wires. It has new fiber that the cable companies have put up there. It has new fiber that the telephone company is using to replace their copper wire system, and it has somebody else who's actually stringing it there so that they can get ready for the 5G cellular system. So if you look at that wooden pole, which costs about $36,000, it gives me a lot more value than almost anything else that is in the utility infrastructure.
Okay.
And that's the natural monopoly, but we haven't valued those poles. We haven't replaced them on a regular basis. They aren't frequently capable of carrying the weight of the wires that you guys are going to be renting to provide power to your customers, much less all the other new technology that people are trying to cram on there.
So that actually raises an important point. When a CCA starts, it's not creating additional load, but the investor-owned utilities aren't selling their contracts, which creates a doubly procured situation in California. So the CPUC hasn't required these utilities to sell off contracts they don't need, and it's actually leading to a strange market perversion where ratepayers are doubly exposed to the energy market, and we have this floating problem of exit fees changing frequently for decades at this point. And so I'm wondering, is it time to have two things happen? One is, are you saying there's an exit plan for the IOUs to leave retail generation? That's one question. And the other is it time to really make the investor-owned utilities sell off these long assets?
I don't have a plan. It would be inappropriate for me to have a plan. I can't actually advocate a position until we've actually collected evidence and all the commissioners read it and deliberated in public. But I think those are the kinds of questions that we'll be asking on May 19th, because they are right there in front of us.
Yeah. I think it's also important to think about, so there's this term called provider of last resort that's talked about a lot as a justification for the utilities hanging on to these contracts, and I think we need to challenge that. It's my view that community choice programs as a public agency with long-term contract obligations that serve the majority of customers, they're the default provider, and if a customer leaves, they pay a transitional rate, we're the provider of last resort. And I think that argument of the utilities being a more stable force, to me, falls flat. And I think the fact that we don't have long track records is something that I think is going to prove out over time, but it's also, it's a question that I think needs to be answered, because it hasn't been answered, there's a lot of things on the table that are costing ratepayers money, like double procurement, and I think we need to answer that question soon.
There's lots of anomalies here that I had struggled with. I mean, I have to tell you that when I started in October 2009, people would come to me and tell me that you couldn't get any renewables built in California. It was an article of faith. I would go to rooms that were 5 times this size with people all telling us you can't get anything built here in California. The only way the utilities would meet their obligations was through RECs that they bought off of generation from out of state. And so that hasn't proven to be true. I heard...
By the way, folks, this gentleman did a lot to get those renewables online. You don't have to clap again, but he had a lot to do with it.
4 years ago, people told me that the future was local distributed energy resources. I believe strongly that there's an important role to be played within the distribution grid, and it's part of this challenge of moving towards more customer choice. But I got to tell you, 3 of the biggest companies in the rooftop solar space are gone in the space of 4 years.
It's a competitive space.
Yeah, SunEdison, Solar City, Sungevity. Where are they? So I have this obligation to provide some stability in people's lives, and that everything that's happening happens so fast that becomes harder and harder and harder and harder to do. So for people who don't want to think about their energy supply, who just want to know that they're going to get a bill and they're going to pay it, and that they have somebody to blame if they get rate increases, we're going to have to make sure that that's there for them. And if there are problems and credit problems within CCAs, we're going to have to make sure that there's some way to ensure that there is a provider of last resort behind them. So I don't know what the answers to these questions are. The central things that we must do is make sure that we keep the system at 60 cycles. We must absolutely make sure that there's always somebody there to help people to keep their lights on. We have to provide a way to help to subsidize low income and very, very, very fragile members of the California public. And we have to protect people against gouging and predatory tactics. So those are the historic responsibilities of the CPUC, no matter what else happens. Now, frankly, I don't think that the CPUC will end up looking anything like the CPUC of today. There was a period where we had 150 people who inspected trucks every day, along with the CHP officer. We're down to 5 people who go out and look at trucks. The last part of our real functional responsibility in terms of commercial trucking is the moving van industry, where by statute we are required to keep their rates at a certain level. If you charge less than that, we're supposed to beat you into submission. So it is a very arcane beast. It's certainly going to undergo more change as we move along.
And it's wonderful to hear you say that you're open to those changes. How many of you know what the name of the PUC was 105 years ago when it was created? Yeah, it was the Railroads Commission. So
they are also deregulated. We're allowed to go look at their wheels and the tracks.
So, Mr. Cypher, I know you probably have more to say on this topic, and please do, but don't we have some obligation here, Community Choice Energy, to the, let's see, how do I put it, towards the electricity customers that remain with the investor-owned utilities? Isn't there an obligation here that has to be fulfilled?
Oh, for sure. So one of the things that's a principle of law is that if a community choice program forms, it can't cause costs or rates, rather, to increase for the remaining bundled customers at the utility. And I think that principle needs to be talked about at the policy level, because what indifference means varies a lot depending on who you talk to. So that fee called the power charge indifference adjustment today, and there are other fees that are related as well, is a pretty hefty fee. It's more than half the cost of electricity at this point for residential customers, or half the cost of generation rather. And so, like for example, our generation rates and many community choice program generation rates are about 34% lower than PG&E's, but our customers only save 1% on their bill. So that's how big the fee is. And that essentially is designed to take account of the fact that the utilities were told to buy contracts early to jumpstart the renewable industry to have greenhouse gas savings, and the principle that makes sense. I think the big problem is there's so many problems. One is we implemented this system called decoupling back a while ago that said the utilities can't earn a profit off of the sale of electricity. They earn a profit off of investing in infrastructure. And the good part about that was it was supposed to make them neutral about energy efficiency programs, and so they wouldn't fight them. And it kind of did, but the bigger problem it generated is they don't care about what contract price they pay. So they can't lose and they can't win. So it's in an incredibly lazy system where a utility has no motivation. If the CPUC approves it, if it's good enough to get approved, then it's done. And that means there's zero incentive to manage those contracts to be optimally low cost. There's political reasons to re-up contracts that are way out of market, even though that's a problem. And I think there's a ton of those kinds of issues that are structural. And then there's a responsibility question. Well, it is the legal requirement of utilities to minimize costs when they can and pass on only unavoidable costs. Are they doing that? And in my view, they're not. And the bigger problem is we can't even know, because the contracts are so secret that we can't even sign a non-disclosure agreement and look at them. Even the staff in our shop who don't work on contracting can't do that. Even our general counsel can't do that. Only somebody who's outside of a market participant, who will never work for another market participant in California again. The non-disclosure on this is just bogus.
I know. When I started at the commission, the first 2 weeks I was there, I asked my staff about the procurement process, and they said, well, we can't tell you. You have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And I said, great, I'm going to sit in front of a senator and tell him, I'd like to answer your question, but I can't tell. I pulled the staff out, all of them, out of that at that time. So I know this issue's been going on. Yeah. I'm sure you're well aware of it. But you're raising some big concerns here. What's the oversight, right? How do we know that there's not over-procurement, that there aren't charges?
Well, there is over-procurement. We know that. And it's significant and getting more significant because CCAs are departing load and they're not selling any of these assets or contracts. The closure of Diablo will help a bit. That's a departing supply as opposed to a departing load. But the real question is we need to be able to audit what's going on. We need to be able to ensure that the utilities are, in any legal relationship, if I cause you financial harm, the judge in that case is going to tell me, I owe you money, but you have to minimize how much I owe you if you have that ability. That's how legal breakups work. And so we're definitely looking to the CPUC to tell the utilities, you need to take all the actions necessary to minimize these costs, but more importantly, you need to sell these assets. And the reason why that's important is then we know what the number is. So when municipal utilities form, investor-owned utilities sell their assets. They have a fixed number. We know what that number is. They can either bond and buy it out, or they can amortize that. A CCA is in a similar position, but we don't have that current process at this time. So it's a situation where having some certainty is incredibly valuable, because right now we find out sometimes the day before the fee changes that it was 30 or 40 or 50% higher than the forecast. That, the day before this goes into effect, we need 5 years warning. And we need to know where that's coming, because we're procuring a supply on the basis of that fee. We need to know how competitive we are. So that's an issue that really is ahead of us and will probably be worked out in the next year. We really need to solve that.
So I know President Picker would like to respond, but we need to hear from you, and we need to get into this issue about what's the PAM now stand for? The PCIA has been potentially replaced here. It's now the
Oh, that's not going to happen. But the
Oh, wait, let's let President Picker respond. President Picker.
I'm actually not going to respond because I think we're going to open a proceeding on this, and I don't want to actually articulate positions in advance on something that
I
I
understand.
don't have
I was
before me
concerned.
yet. So all I can say is that these questions don't seem to be easy to settle. The Sacramento Municipal Utility District was formed in the late teens, early 20s. Took them almost 25 years to settle on price and to actually buy assets from PG&E to become a publicly owned utility. So it doesn't surprise me that there's a lot of unresolved conflicts and tests and tension on both sides. And, it's like everything else that I've seen in energy since I started on this. Everybody's pointing fingers at everybody else. It's very hard to get to a simple solution, and the world just moves on despite the fact that we disagree.
Okay, well, I don't think you're limited. You want to continue?
just a short add is that I will say in our territory, PG&E has been very engaging on this topic, and we've been talking about alternatives to this. And so we do expect to put forward an alternate idea to this PAM proposal. And so I would just say wait, the jury's out on really what the effective solution is.
So, but while we're on this topic, I've got just a couple of questions I want to throw in here because I think that it indicates perhaps I want to get away from a Northern California bias. There's some concerns going on down here in San Diego and Southern California, Edison. A couple of folks are asking, particularly you, President Picker, local grassroots efforts are working actively. Community Choice Energy has been very public, and San Diego Gas and Electric has been very public in lobbying efforts to quash these efforts. Will the PUC open a proceeding? Will the PUC open a formal investigation on, well, again, this was Sempra. I thought it might have been another one, but there's some concerns. We've seen the actions of the investor-owned utilities in the past. We had a proposition I'm sure you're all aware of that was run by one of our IOUs a while ago. I think it was 8 years ago. We've seen legislative efforts. We've seen lobbying practices, mailing, marketing, mailing. I mean, the legislature actually had to step in, I think you may recall, and pass some laws so that Marin Clean Energy could get off the ground a while back. What are we doing to protect these kinds of practices? Are you concerned about this? Are you aware of it?
Sorry, I'm not sure what legislation you're referring to. So.
Well, Senate Bill 790 by Mark Leno was called the Code of Conduct, and it essentially, you're familiar with that, I think, that it restricted how much a utility could market against a community choice program. And so it essentially prevents that kind of activity as well as some other decency.
So I think what I'm getting a sense of some of the questions.
So is there any indications that in the issue you're discussing that they spent ratepayer dollars as opposed to shareholder dollars?
I don't think that's the issue. The issue is whether or not they're pursuing practices in an effort to stop or thwart these.
So I think my concern is whether if they're spending ratepayer dollars to do that, that I think would be an issue. But if there's no indication, then I need to know more.
All right, let's go on to another subject, or do you want to say anything more about the issue that we've been talking about? We can't talk much about this portfolio allocation methodology that's been proposed. Mr. Syphers says that's not going to happen.
There is a petition before us, so I just
Will
don't
it be
want
discussed at all at the en banc hearing, do you think?
Probably not, unless one of the panelists brings it up.
Yeah. By the way, I went on the website this week. Unless you have a seat in the Byron Shear Auditorium, which I think is one of the largest auditoriums in Sacramento, don't bother going. It's full.
No, but we will be webcasting it, and we're looking for overflow seating elsewhere in downtown Sacramento where we can also webcast it for people.
Okay. Let's talk about protecting the non-CCE or bundled customers a little bit more. And maybe I'll redirect this a little bit. Where are we going with all of this? And you've hinted at it, President Picker, that we're probably in a big transformational period right now. Put your crystal ball in front of you and tell us, how is this going to end up? Where are we going to be 5 years from now? Are we going to indeed have the 60% I forget the number. I'm sorry, I got in late last night, and I'm only operating on 3 cylinders, and it's an 8-cylinder engine. So where are we going to be in 5-6 years? Are we going to see this enormous proliferation of community choice energy? Do you think it's going to happen because consumers want it? Are we going to be able to adjust to it? Or do you see a different model? President Picker?
I'm still trying to figure out what happened to the solar thermal industry, so.
Price. I mean, PV's just plummeted.
So there's so many variables out there. All I can do is try to figure out what are the most likely scenarios that we're going to encounter, what are the best way to provide more customer choice, some affordability for customers, at the same time that we want to allow people to choose value. Because there's a lot of things that people are doing in their energy that is not really purely low cost. It is about value. For a long time, that was the promise of renewables. People wanted renewables because they were clean, not because they were cheap. Now all of a sudden they're cheap. Holy cow, we screwed up and succeeded. What's wrong with us in California?
It's wonderful.
So it's very hard for me to parse that out. I think what we need to do is have a real strong discussion about what do we need to do to make sure that people are not being gouged or people aren't engaging in predatory practices in terms of selling. There's evidence from other states and from the rooftop solar industry that predatory practices do exist along with customer choice. How do we make sure that we protect those customers who are least able to actually engage in these kinds of complicated decisions? What's that look like? What does that structure look like? Who is the provider of last resort that can actually guarantee them universal service at a rate that is affordable? What do we do about meeting our energy goals? There is an argument, at least at this point, that having some central planning actually is pretty useful in terms of defining, clarifying, and pursuing our energy goals. There I have a clearer sense that what we are going to force people to do is not simply invest in cleaning up the electricity supply, but use that electricity supply to carve out 20% of the market share of the gas industry and 40% of the petroleum industry. Otherwise, we miss our 2030 goal. That's what the pathways modeling tells us. So if we don't do that with the electricity supply, and we don't do that with all of the load-serving entities, will we actually have the investments, the financial basis, and the will to actually get that 2030 goal? And then last but not least, how do we keep the whole system operating reliably? And that there are critical features that you have to achieve as load-serving entities, including voltage support, ramping, and frequency control that people don't usually think about when they think about supply. So all those things are things that we have to guarantee whatever the scenario is. So I think that that's what the conversation will revolve on, and I don't want to get my whole life wrapped up in a jurisdictional dispute or a ideological dispute about which model is the best to do that. I think we need to create systems that achieve those underlying goals of our energy system and allow a variety of different models to thrive within it. We've talked about some of the problems. They are problems.
Yeah. I think as public agencies, community choice is in a good position to actually take on a lot of the issues that you talked about. And so one of the things that I want to tease apart is the community choice, or rather the regulatory rules that apply to community choice were largely created because of direct access and the idea of community choice, because they were mostly established before any provider was serving community choice. And those two models are different, and they're very different in the sense that we saw what happened in 2000 when DA fled the state and were engaged in short-term contracts, and we definitely know that direct access is targeting industrial and large commercial, which raises the cost on residential and low income because the cost basis can't be spread across those customers that are paying more. And so community choice has this compact with the public, which is by law, we must offer service to everyone. And we cannot withhold service to low income or residential customers or the people who really need the support. And because of our public agency status, every single one of our boards is going to demand that anyway. So I think we're in this very strong position to take that leadership role. And I think that makes this a more solvable problem than if we were dealing with private actors with a profit motive, which is one of the reasons the CPUC exists, of course, is if you have a utility that has a monopoly status, there's a watchdog function that's essential about that. And you can't really get away from that in the private model.
Oops. Sorry, I thought I turned that off.
Me too.
Oh, they're calling to tell me to shut up.
I doubt that. It wouldn't work anyhow, would it?
Might not. So, I don't know, how long do we go for?
Well, we've got about another 15 minutes.
Okay, I want to reserve a couple minutes at the end for a challenge.
We absolutely will.
Okay.
Absolutely.
You got a glove to throw down?
Huh? Yeah. Yeah.
That's good.
I want you guys to prove to me that you have a compact with the public. I want to put you to the test.
All right.
I want to see real results. I don't want to hear people talk about their community roots. I've done a lot of community organizing, so I'm going to put you guys to the test.
Good.
Okay. That's right. You want to talk more about over-procurement? Either of you?
Well, it's an issue.
So President Picker, I think the real issue here, and we'll let Geof go through it first, is how do we communicate to the investor-owned utilities? Don't over-procure. Stop. We got it covered. There's going to be enough CCAs going forward. Geof, is that a right way to put it or not?
Well, it's what the utilities said. Well, PG&E said it in the Diablo Canyon proceeding. It said that they have more than enough energy through 2030 something. They wouldn't have to buy any at all. And I don't think that's an overstatement. I actually think that that's something that is pretty clearly understood. I think the issue is, how do we solve that problem? So I hear the commissioner saying that there needs to be somebody to backstop the public agency and be there. I think it's odd to me to hear a private company backing up a public agency. Where else do we do that? We don't do that. We have public agencies backing up private companies, generally.
Go ahead.
And so, the provider of last resort for PG&E was DWR, and that was assigned by the state of California. Back in the energy crisis, there was an assigned provider of last resort, essentially. And similar kinds of actions could be taken for a muni. And so I think the question is, are CCAs mature enough to have earned that right? And I think that's the question, right?
Yeah.
And so I want to take that challenge and say, we are now, and we may not have been in the past, but I would say that we are now, and I would like to prove that.
So, Geof, I got to say that I think you are. I'm pretty skeptical about some of the other newer CCAs.
Can you hear him? Everybody hear him okay?
If we can put our finger on what you're skeptical about, we can up our game. And so one of the things that we're working on at Cal CCA is, what are the best practices for community choice? We're starting to document those, figure out what they are, and we do want to know what a bad CCA looks like, because if you have a city manager who embezzles money in a city, your city can go bankrupt. We've seen that in California. You could have a bad CCA. So how do we articulate what needs to be done for your sake so that we can get past that question?
I think I will not take that in the context of CCA, because I don't think that you are the entire spectrum of entities that we have to deal with.
Okay.
So, but I will go back to those four things that I think that that any entity is ultimately going to have to somehow be accountable for. The ability to keep the system at 60, the ability to provide for customers, including some mechanism for provider of last resort, a way to ensure that there's no predatory activities, yada, yada, yada. Those things must remain constant. I think that there are many models and many ways that people do it, and I agree. There is unevenness throughout every system. And so our job is to make sure that there is that baseline of protection. What I worry about is that we also can end up preventing excellence. And so that is my fear. This started out, however, as a discussion about over-procurement.
Right.
And so let's face it, we got to over-procure in a highly dynamic, renewable environment. We're not buying base load anymore. We have to over-procure. Even when we had base load, we bought 2x, 3x the system. That was the national standard, simply because you never knew when there was going to be plant outages. And in order to keep our economy running, in order to make sure that people have the electricity they need, both for their medical devices at home and for their 55-inch LCD TVs, we have to have some degree of over-procurement. The question is, what type, where, how much? You guys are mostly worried about it because it's affecting your rates. I think that is an issue. I worry about it first and foremost because of that reliability question. Now we're in an environment where not only is load increasingly variable, where we have less 24/7 manufacturing in California and a lot more cooling, both for the industries that do thrive in California on those hot summer days. So we're over-procuring essentially for maybe 200 hours out of the year, whereas before we were over-procuring for a base load. Furthermore, the technologies that we have are really, really, really wiggly. They don't stay still. They change by the season, by the day, by the location. So we're in a much different environment. Answering your question cannot be addressed without trying to figure out how we operate in this new world where the clean technologies that we want to provide our electricity are fundamentally different from all of the regulatory and fiscal systems that we developed. It is creating all kinds of challenges for some of those power plants that we all rely on for fast ramping or for base load, because they are increasingly unable to pay the cost of their infrastructure simply on their sales during those 200 hours on 15 key days of the year when they turn them up. It's, so I'm just telling you that we have a ways to go before we figure out that system, and I can even answer your question as to what the heck over-procurement is.
That's actually really helpful.
That is.
And one of the things that would, I think, help solve that problem is if we can accelerate the adaptation of rates to match something closer to the wholesale reality. And so my challenge to the CPUC is this. In the past, and actually in the present, we've been setting time of use rates on what's been happening, say, 4 or 5 years ago in the market. And what we really ought to be doing is setting them based on 5 years in the future. Because then we have time to respond, react, prepare, and we would be properly valuing energy storage and demand response by saying, hey, if you actually produced a solar system with solar, but stored it and put it into the grid at 9 p.m., that's worth 4x or 10x what it would be worth at noon. And then we could actually invest in those kind of systems. At the moment, transmission and delivery rates are set by the CPUC for the utility. CCAs have nothing to do with that. And those are the majority of a customer bill. So we actually can't unilaterally design a program that, for example, charges electric cars in the daytime when it would be most valuable, because our customers are telling us, why would we do that? It's so expensive. And when you could probably charge 0 from 12 to 3 p.m. right now and be ahead. And that would be an amazing way to juice the electric car market. And so I think if we had at least pilot rates or early studies that could actually lead to...
Greg, in 2006, when the community choice aggregation law was written, did anybody anticipate the environment we're in now?
No.
Okay. All I can tell you is this world is changing so fast that we can't regulate as fast as it innovates.
Yeah.
And that is a essential core challenge. We are required to act as a technical court. We have statutory timelines that we must meet to allow people to comment on everything that gets filed before us. We have to allow them to respond to people's briefs. We have to allow them to call in people to be challenged in our legal, our kind of alternative court system. We then have to bring all this together, and we can only make decisions that are based on the things that are in the record. There are people out there who are innovating who don't know how or can't afford to participate in the PUC, who can provide part of that answer. So we are blindly feeling our way to the future with the regulatory system that was written into the state constitution in the year 1890.
Fair enough.
Sorry, guys.
So we got work to do.
Yeah. So we're struggling to find things out. As I started to see when I was in the governor's office, that the nature of way people could use electricity in the distribution system was changing so fast, we started to really think about what would take place in the distribution system. When I came to the CPUC, people who would come and talk to me in some kind of a workshop or a meeting that we sponsored in the governor's office just could not afford the amount of legal representation it took to get through a very transactional process. That's created to make sure that the discussion is not overweighted by the utilities. It's designed to protect you. But infrequently what it does is it prevents us from having full access to the information that we could do just what you say, which is to try to figure out what the world looks like in 5 years. So what we have done in some of these cases is actually work with outside third parties to convene people to have workshops to put together papers that we can then put into our record and say, okay, here's who put this paper together, here's what it covers. Let's talk about the paper. Is it actually a real picture of what's going on? Does it ask good questions? Does it propose answers for it? Let's start the conversation there. So it's a way of actually bringing more information into the system than our parties would actually be able to bring to us. That still is fairly constraining. We've spent 3 years now trying to figure out, how do you figure out where in the distribution grid is there space for more distributed energy resources without having to strengthen it and add more capability? Where is it that we might actually be able to avoid new investments by having distributed energy resources? And I got to tell you that it's not the dominant utilities against the public. It's actually different technology providers fighting against each other to set the table for their next market expansion. Mm-hmm. So this is a very dynamic, complicated setting where everybody's going to have a gripe. And I don't think that we are going to easily be able to set the framework that will work for 5 years in the future. Having said that, I would love to do that.
All right, let's work on it.
Yeah.
All right, so we don't have a whole lot of time left, and I really apologize. We've only gotten to a couple of questions. But I want to go back to this crystal ball thing, because I know, having served in the government for a while, it's difficult. You're playing catch-up a lot, because these changes are taking place right before your eyes, and you're balancing all these issues, and it is very challenging. But what if we have a future 5 years from now where we do have a predominance of community choice energy, local control? We've already got 10% of the state under municipal control. What if indeed the old AB 1890 of 1996, with the intent of creating the investor-owned utility as a wires company, what if that future comes forward? Are we ready for it?
Then everybody will hate you guys.
Who's everybody? I think everybody will
That
be
is
in a
your
seat.
reward for success, is that you'll be seen as the provider.
All right. By the way, President Picker,
Every gripe will come to you.
somebody did send me a note here saying that apparently the issue in San Diego is that it appears that ratepayer funds are potentially being used. So it may be something to just be aware of. I think we have time for maybe one more question, and then I need to turn it over to the both of you if you'd like to make some closing comments. Well, so many of these have to do with what's the role of the IOU in the future, assuming that CCAs, CCEs really take over.
I just don't see a dominant player in the future. I think it's as we disaggregate, at least in the future that I can see, there'll be many players playing different roles.
Yeah. So President Picker, here's a question. You're familiar with the Muni model as a former SMUD, or as a SMUD customer and former SMUD board member. Community choice is like a Muni light, and I think I've used that term myself in the past, serving the public, which CCA board members represent as elected officials. Where do you see the similarity between CCAs and Munis, which are all public agencies?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. So when I ran for the SMUD board, I knew that SMUD was a great utility, but I also remember
Which, by the way, it is.
SMUD owned a nuclear power plant Rates were going up. They had the turnover of 3 boards in 2 years. They had 6 general managers in under a year. And people in Sacramento were actually talking about getting rid of SMUD and going back to PG&E. I also know that they've made great progress, and I really celebrate the turnaround that they've made. But they weren't always the entity that they are today. I'll also point to the fact that the dominant force to preserve coal in the United States is munis and co-ops, not investor-owned utilities. They have the assets to move away. It's small, community-owned entities who are dependent on coal and can't afford to take the loss on their balance sheet to make the switch. So when I went to SMUD, part of what I saw my mission on is to retire from state government and to figure out how to build a strong pro-carbon, pro-environment caucus within the public power movement. The public power movement was designed to bring power to everybody. It was a universal access movement. It was designed to ensure that those people who the dominant private utilities didn't want to serve actually had somebody. But now, over time, it's as part of that populist moment, it is now the force that continues to fight for the coal industry. So there's my answer.
So,
Everything changes, nothing is perfect, everything is subject to challenge, and I don't have the answer.
So, gentlemen, we need to bring it to a close. Please take a minute or two. Should we let Geof go first?
Yeah.
Please take a minute or two, no more, because we've got the high sign already, and we want to make sure everybody gets their break. It's important that the sponsors see you out there and that you thank them for sponsoring this workshop. Geof, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having this forum. I think it's important, and I actually learned a lot about what you're looking for, particularly around the question of how do we resolve provider of last resort, which is really underlying a lot of these exit fee questions. And I think one of the observations I have about that is that all of the elements that you list as being key components around reliability and grid stability and all of that depend on guaranteed rate recovery today. And CCAs have no guaranteed rate recovery. And so we have a little bit of a mismatch. And so that's part of the flavor of solving this problem that I want to start thinking about and bring some ideas to the table. I think at the big picture, I think we're at a crossroads. I agree with the commissioner that there's a huge question on the table of, in a world where utilities have no incentive to manage contracts for low cost or other reasons, why are they in the business? And I think the question is, what do we do about that? And I think that's something that we want to bring proposals for. What excites me is this room, the fact that we do have massive growth in community choice, the fact that there's this tremendous energy, and we're solving this problem, and we're actually causing a little bit of an increase in the labor force at the utilities as they sort this out, so they're hiring. So it's a jobs program.
We had in mind.
Right, and I will take your challenge about addressing each of those topics and bringing you something. I really want to honor that, so thank you.
Good. President Pickard.
Well, you know that I actually admire the work you're doing in Sonoma. I think you actually have a healthy handle on some of the big challenges, so I look forward to continuing to argue with you and failing to resolve things in one single fell swoop. So here's my challenge to you guys. You guys think you actually have a better handle on what communities want, and that you represent a force in communities that the utilities don't. Let me tell you what the challenge is. This is relatively certain. What happens on August 21st?
Eclipse.
Yes.
What happens in a state that has
If anybody didn't hear that, there's an eclipse of the sun. We'll go across the United
What
States.
happens in a state where we have probably 10 gigawatts, maybe 12 gigawatts installed utility-sized solar on the other side of the meter and 5 gigawatts behind the meter? What happens then? Anybody just want to say it? Yeah, there's not there. All of a sudden, there's a lot of electricity not there. So the ISO thinks we could be short as much as 7,000 megawatts. So my challenge
From
to
the
you...
eclipse?
Yeah, during the eclipse.
The Umbra is only 20, 30 miles wide.
Yeah, but you lose some of the it's a band and it crosses the state, and you lose a lot of the stuff leading up in advance because you get a dimming as the partial eclipse goes through. So, 7,000 gigawatts. Who here feels that they have the relationship with their customers? They can ask people to do things to not use electricity so we don't have to spin up those gas peakers. So it's a race for the pink slips. The people who deliver the most demand response win my limited admiration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, wait a minute. You told me you guys had this handled. So we will be putting together options for people, and we'll be doing some specific efforts to try to reach out to engage people around this. But what I'm saying is within your service areas or your potential service areas, bring me evidence that you beat what I can do.
Okay.
Got it.
That's when I know that you'll be real.
Gentlemen, we need to bring it to a close. Geof, thank you very
Thank you.
much. You did a great job.
Yeah.
Yeah.